If you're a little nervous using any punctuation other than commas, periods, and question marks, your writing is missing out on some pretty interesting sentence structures that colons and dashes could help you create. Hi, my name is Stephanie with Principia Tutors and Consultants. In today's video, we're going to explore how to correctly use colons and dashes in your own writing. Colons and dashes can both be used to introduce a list or explanation, and that similarity might lead you to believe the two punctuations are interchangeable. However, there are distinctly different situations where you should use one and not the other. Luckily, the difference between both punctuations are not that confusing once you get the hang of them. There are two situations where you would use a colon. The first is before a list, and the second is before an explanation. So an example of a colon being used before a list would be, Rebecca loved many things about the beach, colon, the warm sand, the ocean breeze, and the sound of crashing waves. So you can kind of see there, the list that follows the colon answers the question, what were the many things that Rebecca loved about the beach? Colons kind of work the same when they're introducing an explanation. So an example of using a colon before an explanation would be, however, there was one thing she couldn't stand about the beach in May, colon, the blooms of jellyfish. There's a few things that you do have to keep in mind to make sure that you're using a colon correctly. So first, the information that comes before a colon has to be an independent clause, or essentially a sentence that can stand alone as a complete thought. However, the information that comes after the colon could either be a sentence or a fragment. So you can see in the two examples above, the warm sand, the ocean breeze, and the sound of crashing waves is not an independent clause, and neither is the blooms of jellyfish. Another thing to keep in mind is that you never want to place phrases like such as, or which are, or including, before or after the colon. The colon stands in as those phrases. It is indicating to the reader that you're about to give an explanation or a list that answers any questions the initial sentence might have left hanging for the reader. So just to use an example above, it would be incorrect to say, there was one thing she couldn't stand about the beach in May, and that was, colon, the blooms of jellyfish. Dashes have three major uses. The first is to set off a non-essential clause. The second is to introduce a list or an explanation. And the third is to create a deliberate pause. So to use a dash to set off a non-essential clause, the main thing that you want to keep in mind is that two dashes are exactly equivalent to two commas in the case of non-essential clauses. Non-essential clauses, by the way, are phrases that can be removed from a sentence without affecting its essential meaning or grammatical structure. So just really quick to give an example, Emily Dickinson, dash, who was born in Amherst, Massachusetts, dash, was an American poet. So you can see that who was born in Amherst, Massachusetts is a non-essential clause. We don't need it for the sentence because Emily Dickinson was an American poet, can stand alone. But the non-essential clause just gives us a little bit more information. However, just because both dashes and commas can set off non-essential clauses does not mean that they're interchangeable if you've already determined which one you're going to use to set off the non-essential clause. And if that sounds confusing, essentially what that means is that if one dash appears before a non-essential clause, another dash has to end the non-essential clause. So you can't start with a dash and then have a comma end the non-essential clause. It needs to be either two dashes or two commas. So it would be incorrect to say Emily Dickinson, comma, who was born in Amherst, dash, was an American poet. And you'll notice that I actually removed Amherst, comma, Massachusetts. The original writer likely used a dash to set off this non-essential clause to avoid the confusion of the commas in the first place. But you can't have a comma and then a dash set off a non-essential clause. The second way that you can use dashes might seem pretty familiar. They can be used before a list or an explanation, so very similar to a colon. The major difference, though, is the stylistic use of dashes. So when you think dashes, you want to think drama. So while both dashes and colons can be used to introduce the next part of a sentence, a dash is a little bit stronger and more informal of a mark than a colon is. And you can kind of see that in the example I've given below. Just getting to the park is an adventure, dash. It's a 9-hour drive through miles of wilderness to reach the entrance. Do you see how the dash kind of gives us a slight pause as it's giving us that information? That's intentional. It tells us this is a pretty important or a pretty potent part of the sentence. It's something a little bit dramatic. And then keeping with that same theme of dashes, giving us some drama, the other way that you can use a dash is just to create a pause. Dashes can be used to deliberately interrupt a statement or to create a dramatic pause or sense of suspense. So if we take this example, Lisa always loved going to the grocery store to buy cheap but pretty flower bouquets, dash, and for the chance to see the cashier she had a crush on. You can kind of see how the dash there is supposed to be creating a little bit of suspense. You're supposed to stop, kind of wait for the final reveal of the sentence. So another way that you could read that sentence might be, Lisa always loved going to the grocery store to buy cheap but pretty flower bouquets, dash, wait for it, and for the chance to see the cashier she had a crush on. Just gives us a little bit more punch to that sentence. So let's try combining the following sentence using either a colon or a dash. So here we have two sentences. Although her favorite was the violin, she was adept at several instruments. What instruments could she play? Next sentence tells us that she could play the piano, the guitar, and the flute. Doesn't really seem like we want any drama with that. It's just kind of giving us some information. And remember that colons are used to introduce a list, so they would make the most sense to use here. So the rewrite of your sentence might look something like this. Although her favorite was the violin, she was adept at several instruments, colon, the piano, the guitar, and the flute. Here's another example. Adopting a puppy is not ideal for everyone. What makes them less than ideal is that they require a lot more patience and attention than adult dogs do. What information does the second sentence give us? And does the first sentence set up any sort of question that is answered in that second sentence? And remember, colon can be used before an explanation. So here is how a rewrite of these two sentences might look. Adopting a puppy is not ideal for everyone, colon. Puppies require a lot more patience and attention than adult dogs do. So you can see the very first sentence is just what comes right before the colon. And the second sentence, we've just taken the most vital information about what makes a puppy less than ideal. And we've added that after the colon. So puppies require a lot more patience and attention than adult dogs do, because that's the explanation that is following the colon. Now, I've been favoring colons a little bit, but let's try to use a dash to separate a non-essential clause. So for number 3, we have two sentences. The wingspan of the monarch butterfly ranges from 8.9 to 10.2 centimeters. The monarch butterfly is a species commonly mistaken for the similar-looking viceroy butterfly. So if you're thinking about where you could put the non-essential clause in this sentence, you want to think about what information is repeated that you can cut out. We can see that the monarch butterfly appears in the first sentence, and it also appears in the second sentence. So then it might make sense to insert the non-essential clause right after we get the monarch butterfly the first time. That way we don't have to repeat its name again. So if we put a non-essential clause after that, it might make sense for our final result to look something like this. The wingspan of the monarch butterfly, dash, a species commonly mistaken for the similar-looking viceroy butterfly, dash, ranges from 8.9 to 10.2 centimeters. Okay, now it's your turn to try. You're going to improve the following sentences with either a dash or a colon. Okay, so here are the two sentences that you can combine with either a dash or a colon. go ahead and pause the screen to give yourself a little bit of time, but read through both sentences and think about if you think a dash or a colon would make the most sense to try combining both of these. Okay, so how did you do? All right, I'm going to reveal my answers. So, Impressionist paintings have several major characteristics: colon, a focus on outdoor scenes, an emphasis on the interplay of light and dark, and a sense of movement. Or, Impressionist paintings have several major characteristics: dash, a focus on outdoor scenes, an emphasis on the interplay of light and dark, and a sense of movement. So, grammatically, either of these two work. So in this case, the colon would likely be the most appropriate. While grammatically, again, both sentences are correct, stylistically, it's best to save the dashes for when you need a sentence to really pack a punch. I hope that this video helped to demystify colons and dashes for you at least a little bit. And I hope that you now feel a little bit more comfortable sprinkling these into your sentences just to make your writing sparkle a little bit more. Thank you for watching.